All right, today we are diving into one of the biggest, most devastating catastrophes in all of human history, the Black Death. Now, this isn't just a story about some old disease. It's really the story of how a tiny, microscopic organism brought an entire continent to its knees. And in doing so, somehow, completely by accident, created the modern world as we know it.
I mean, just listen to that. That's from an eyewitness in Florence, and it just captures the absolute horror of it all. This wasn't just some medical crisis, right? It was a psychological one. It literally tore the fabric of society apart, pushing humanity to its absolute breaking point. It showed us the very best and the absolute worst of what we're capable of. So, to really get our heads around this, we're going to tackle it in 4 parts. First, we'll look at how the world was basically a tinderbox, just waiting for a spark. Then, we'll meet the killer itself. After that, we'll see the complete societal collapse it caused. And finally, and this is the really wild part, we'll explore the shocking rebirth that came out of all that destruction. Okay, so before we even meet the microscopic villain of our story, we have to understand the world it was about to walk into. See, the mid-14th century wasn't some sleepy, isolated period. It was actually a world that was more connected, and because of that, more vulnerable than it had ever been before. Think about this. For the first time, really, you could travel pretty safely from one end of the known world to the other. And that was all thanks to something called the Pax Mongolia, the Mongol Peace. This opened up these incredible networks like the Silk Road. They were basically highways for goods, ideas, and culture. But, as it turns out, they also became superhighways for disease. This slide really lays out the perfect recipe for disaster. You've got these brand new global highways for the disease to travel on. You've got booming cities that are crowded and filthy, just perfect incubators. The people themselves are already weakened by famine. And the final ingredient, nobody had any idea what a germ was or how diseases actually spread. The stage was set for something truly awful. So the world is a tinderbox. Now it's time to meet the match. We're about to get up close and personal with the microscopic killer that started this fire and see exactly how it was unleashed on a totally unsuspecting continent. Here it is, Yersinia pestis. This tiny single-celled organism was the killer, and it is a master of invasion. It's perfectly evolved to sneak past our body's defenses, multiply like crazy, and just spread relentlessly through our systems. An absolutely perfect killing machine. But you know, Yersinia pestis didn't work alone. Oh no, it had the perfect partners in crime. First, you had the black rats, the reservoir, living everywhere humans lived, in their homes, on their ships. Then you had the carrier, the oriental rat flea. And here's where it gets truly horrifying. The bacteria would actually block up the flea's gut, making it constantly, ravenously hungry. So it would just bite and bite and bite, essentially vomiting bacteria directly into the bloodstream of its victims. A terrifyingly effective system. And this is the moment it all goes from a natural disaster to a deliberate act of war. At the siege of the city of Kaffa, the Mongol army was getting absolutely decimated by the plague, so their commander had this terrifying, brilliant idea. He basically turned his dead soldiers into ammunition, loading their infected bodies onto catapults and flinging them over the city walls. From there, merchants fled the city on ships, not knowing they were carrying the plague with them, straight to Europe. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, you find out the plague wasn't just one disease, it had 3 forms. The bubonic form, the one with the famous boils or buboes, was bad enough. But then, the bacteria could mutate. It could become pneumonic plague, infecting the lungs, becoming airborne, and spreading with just a cough. Mortality rate, nearly 100%. And then there was septicemic plague, an infection of the blood itself. That one was always fatal, sometimes killing a person in just a few hours. And just look at the speed. Once those death ships from Kaffa docked in Sicily in October 1347, the clock started ticking. The invasion began. It just jumped from port city to port city, crawling inland at about 2.5 miles a day. It was relentless. Within just a couple of years, it had swallowed almost all of Europe. So now let's talk about the human cost, because this wasn't just a death toll, you know? This was the complete and total unraveling of civilization itself. Faith, family, law, reason, everything just collapsed under the sheer weight of this unimaginable fear. Just let this number sink in for a second. 60%. Some historians think as much as 60% of the entire population of Europe gone in less than 5 years. There is nothing else in human history that compares to that level of loss.
Entire villages were literally wiped off the map, leaving nothing but ghost towns behind. And behind that massive impersonal number are millions of individual tragedies. This quote from a man in Siena just brings it all down to a devastating human level. Can you even imagine burying your own children with your own hands, surrounded by so much death that you truly believe you are witnessing the end of the world?
Facing this kind of horror, people were absolutely desperate for answers, for any kind of cure. But medieval medicine was just completely useless. Without any knowledge of germs, their so-called treatments were based on superstition and just bad science. I mean, they were lancing boils, which probably just spread the infection, and even drinking their own urine. These weren't cures, they were acts of pure, terrified desperation.
And when reason fails, fear takes over. And that fear so often curdles into horrific violence. People needed someone, anyone, to blame. All across Europe, Jewish communities were falsely accused of causing the plague by poisoning wells. This led to just brutal, awful massacres, like one in Strasbourg, where 1,000 Jewish people were burned alive on St. Valentine's Day. It's an incredibly dark chapter. But here's the thing. Out of this absolute apocalypse, something completely unexpected happened. The Black Death didn't just end a world. In a lot of ways, it accidentally created a brand new one. And this is probably the most surprising part of the whole story. So the plague basically flipped the entire economy on its head. As you can see here, with so many workers dead, labor suddenly became incredibly rare. And because of that, incredibly valuable. For the first time, the survivors, the peasants, the laborers, they had immense bargaining power. And at the same time, with so few people left, land and food became cheap and easy to get. And here's the truly incredible part. The plague did what no peasant revolt had ever managed to do. It completely shattered the feudal system. Serfs weren't tied to the land anymore. They could demand better wages, they could pack up and move to the cities, they could even buy their own property. For those who survived, it was a world of opportunity that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. This massive shakeup just created cracks in the entire old world order. The church's authority took a huge hit because, well, its prayers didn't stop the plague. A new, empowered middle class started to grow, and all of this intense change and questioning, it helped set the stage for two of the biggest movements in Western history, the Renaissance and the Reformation. The world was reborn. So, when you boil it all down, the Black Death taught us a really brutal lesson. Our greatest strength, our ability to connect with each other, can also be our greatest weakness. It hitched a ride on the world's new trade routes, and the result was devastating. So the question for us, living in a world that is so much more connected than 14th century Europe ever was, is how do we manage that exact same risk today? That's something we're thinking about. Thanks for joining me.